The Helios Deep Space Detention Facility hung like a dark jewel against the backdrop of swirling nebula clouds. Inside Cell Block 7, Commander Marcus Kane traced his fingers along the smooth, iridescent walls of his cell, counting days he'd long since lost track of. The former Earth Defense Force officer had grown accustomed to the perpetual hum of the station's antimatter core, but he never quite got used to the eyes watching him. Those eyes belonged to his guard, a Nexarian warrior whose metallic scales shifted colors with each movement, creating patterns that seemed to ripple across her armor. Unlike the other guards who rotated shifts, she remained constant, silent, observing. The Nexarians had named her Valthorian, unyielding storm in their tongue, but the human prisoners simply called her the Ghost. Marcus had seen her kind before on the battlefield. Nexarian elite warriors were living weapons, their bodies enhanced with crystalline technology that made them nearly invincible. But something about this one was different. While other guards sneered or showed contempt, she simply watched. "You know," Marcus said, breaking the silence that had stretched for weeks, "in human culture, starring is considered rude." He didn't expect a response. She had never given one before. But today, something changed. Her head tilted slightly, the bioluminescent markings along her neck pulsing with a faint purple glow. The movement was so subtle that Marcus almost missed it. He straightened, his military training kicking in as he analyzed this deviation from routine. Over his 15 years in the Earth Defense Force, he'd learned that the smallest details often held the greatest significance. "Didn't expect that, did you?" he continued, pushing his advantage. "A human teaching an advanced species about manners." The words were deliberately provocative, designed to test her reaction. The other guards would have already activated his cell's neural suppressors for such insolence. Instead, Valthorian's scaled fingers twitched against her ceremonial spear. The weapon itself was a marvel of Nexarian engineering, capable of channeling enough energy to vaporize a small shuttle. But she held it almost tentatively, as if uncertain of its weight. Marcus recognized that hesitation. He'd seen it in young recruits who questioned their orders, in soldiers who began to see the enemy as something more than targets. It was the first crack in absolute conviction. "They told us you were monsters," he said quietly, watching her reaction. "Crystalline beings without emotion, without mercy. But that's not true, is it? You feel everything, you just hide it better than we do." The chamber's ambient lighting shifted, signaling the approach of the evening guard rotation. Valthorian's posture changed imperceptibly, her grip tightening on her spear. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met his, not the cold, evaluating stare of a guard, but something deeper, almost desperate. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper, with harmonics that made Marcus's bones resonate. "The monsters are not who you think they are, Commander Kane." Before he could respond, she was gone, replaced by another guard who carried himself with the typical Nexarian arrogance. But Marcus barely noticed. His mind was racing, analyzing every word, every subtle inflection in her voice. She hadn't just broken protocol by speaking to him, she'd revealed something crucial. She had called him Commander Kane. Not prisoner, not human, not even by his designation number. She knew who he was, his real identity, not just what was in the prison records. And that meant she knew why he was really here. Marcus lay back on his cell's suspension field, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. After 3 months of imprisonment, he finally had confirmation of what he'd suspected. His capture hadn't been random. The question was, did Valthorian know she had just given him the first piece of a puzzle that would change everything? The station's artificial night cycle began, dimming the lights to simulate darkness. But for Marcus, everything had suddenly become clearer. Tomorrow, he would look at his silent guard with new eyes, watching for more cracks in her perfect Nexarian facade. Because now he knew, behind that crystalline armor and engineered loyalty, there was someone who questioned, someone who might be willing to risk everything for the truth. He closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept returning to that one moment, that brief connection when her carefully maintained walls had slipped. In that instant, he hadn't seen an alien warrior or an enemy combatant. He'd seen someone trapped, just like him, in a game of secrets and lies that stretched across the stars. The message appeared in Marcus's morning ration, etched in microscopic crystalline patterns on the inside of his hydration cube. Most prisoners would have missed it entirely, but 15 years of military cryptography training had taught him to look for patterns in everything. The message was simple. The walls have ears, trust nothing. He casually crushed the cube once he'd memorized the message, watching as Valthorian maintained her post outside his cell. Her crystalline armor seemed duller today, the usual shifting colors muted, as if reflecting inner turmoil. Marcus wondered if she knew about the message, or if there were other forces at work within the station. The next 3 days brought more hidden messages, each more disturbing than the last. Your capture was orchestrated. The war is based on lies. They're looking for something in your memories. Each message appeared in different places, scratched into his meal tray, woven into the pattern of his prisoner uniform, even hidden in the flickering of his cell's force field. Marcus kept his face neutral, years of resistance training helping him maintain his composure. But inside, his mind raced. He'd suspected his capture wasn't random, but these messages suggested something far more sinister than simple military intelligence gathering. On the 4th day, everything changed. During the artificial night cycle, when the station's lighting dimmed to its lowest levels, Valthorian's crystalline armor began to pulse with a subtle rhythm. At first, Marcus thought he was imagining it, but then he recognized the pattern. It was an old Earth military code, one that hadn't been used since the early days of the war. They're scanning your brain during sleep cycles, the pulses translated. Looking for coordinates must keep you awake. Marcus sat up slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might attract attention from the station's surveillance systems. He looked at Valthorian, really looked at her, and for the first time noticed the slight tremors in her hands, the way her normally perfect posture showed signs of fatigue. She had been standing guard during his sleep cycles, using her own crystalline biology to interfere with the station's neural scanning equipment. The effort was clearly taking its toll. "Why?" he whispered, knowing her enhanced hearing would pick up the word. Her response came in more light pulses, each one seemingly more strained than the last. "Because the coordinates in your mind could lead to genocide, both human and Nexarian." Marcus's blood ran cold. 3 years ago, he'd led a classified mission to a region of space known as the Void Quadrant. His team had discovered something there, something so significant that High Command had immediately classified everything about the mission. Even Marcus's memories of what they'd found had been partially suppressed through voluntary neural blocking. Now it all made sense, his seemingly random capture, the intense interrogations focused on his time in the Void Quadrant, the constant neural scans during his sleep cycles. The Nexarian leadership wasn't just looking for military intelligence. They were trying to break through his neural blocks. A sudden commotion from the far end of the cell block interrupted his thoughts. The heavy doors slid open, admitting a group of high-ranking Nexarian officials. Their crystalline armor was adorned with complex patterns that marked them as members of the ruling caste. Valthorian's posture instantly straightened, her armor shifting to display the appropriate formal patterns. But Marcus caught the subtle way her grip tightened on her spear, the almost imperceptible shift in her stance that placed her slightly between him and the approaching officials. "Prisoner Kane," one of the officials announced, his voice carrying harmonics that made Marcus's teeth ache. "You will be transferred to a specialized facility for enhanced interrogation. Your resistance to our standard neural scanning has not gone unnoticed." Marcus rose slowly, his mind racing. Enhanced interrogation meant they would break through his neural blocks by force, regardless of the damage it might do to his mind. He looked at Valthorian, but her face was an impassive mask, her earlier signs of concern hidden behind perfect Nexarian discipline. But as the officials input the codes to deactivate his cell's force field, Valthorian's armor pulsed one final message, so quickly he almost missed it. "Be ready. Tomorrow, everything changes." Marcus allowed himself to be led back to his cell after the officials had finished their inspection and pronouncement. His mind was working overtime, processing everything he'd learned. Whatever he and his team had found in the Void Quadrant, It was significant enough that a Nexarian warrior was willing to commit treason to keep it hidden. As he lay on his suspension field that night, deliberately fighting sleep, he watched Valthorian standing her eternal vigil. She appeared as stoic and unmovable as ever, but now he knew the truth. Behind that crystalline exterior was someone who had seen through the lies of her own people, someone willing to risk everything to prevent a catastrophe. Tomorrow would bring change, and with it danger. But for now, in the quiet hours of the artificial night, a human resistance fighter and a Nexarian warrior shared a silent understanding that transcended species and sides. They were no longer captor and prisoner, but allies in a secret war that neither had chosen, but both were determined to win. The station's artificial dawn never came. Instead, Marcus woke to total darkness and the sound of emergency klaxons. The familiar hum of the antimatter core had been replaced by an eerie silence broken only by distant explosions. His cell's force field flickered erratically, casting strange shadows across the corridor where Valthorian should have been standing. She wasn't there. The force field suddenly collapsed with a faint sizzle. In the darkness, Marcus heard the soft, crystalline chime of Nexarian armor approaching. He tensed, ready for a fight, but relaxed slightly when he recognized the distinctive purple bioluminescence of Valthorian's markings. "We have 18 minutes," she said, her voice no longer a whisper but carrying the full harmonic resonance of her species. "The power disruption won't last longer than that." Marcus stepped out of his cell, muscles tense from months of inaction. "I'm going to need answers before I go anywhere with you." "The answers are in your own mind, Commander." Valthorian's armor shifted colors rapidly, a sign of emotional stress in her species. "But I can show you what I discovered, why I had to intervene." She reached out, her crystalline fingers glowing with neural interface patterns. Marcus hesitated only a moment before nodding. Her fingers touched his temples, and suddenly his mind exploded with images. He saw the void quadrant through Nexarian eyes, not the empty region of space his neural blocks had made him remember, but a vast complex of ancient structures, geometric patterns that defied physics, stretched across thousands of light years. Within these structures, something pulsed with terrible purpose. "The architects," Valthorian's voice echoed in his mind, "the ones who created both our species." More images flooded his consciousness. He saw Nexarian scientists discovering records of genetic manipulation on a cosmic scale. Humanity and the Nexarians hadn't evolved naturally. They had been engineered, created as two halves of a whole. The crystalline technology of the Nexarians, the adaptive resilience of humans, they were meant to complement each other. "The war," Marcus gasped as the neural link broke. "It's all been orchestrated. Someone's been keeping our species fighting each other." "Yes," Valthorian's armor had settled into a deep midnight blue. "There is a faction within the Nexarian leadership, working with certain human officials. They discovered the truth decades ago, but realized that if our species ever united, we would become powerful enough to challenge them." Another explosion rocked the station, closer this time. Valthorian grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him toward an emergency access tunnel. "The coordinates in your mind, they lead to the architect's control center. That's why they wanted your memories so badly. They need to ensure it's never found." They ran through darkened corridors, Valthorian's bioluminescence providing just enough light to navigate. Marcus's mind raced, piecing together fragments of memories that were starting to break through his neural blocks. "My mission to the void quadrant," he said as they climbed through maintenance shafts. "We found something, didn't we? Something that could prove all of this." "You found the key to awakening the architect's network," Valthorian confirmed. "Your team's unique combination of human intuition and salvaged Nexarian technology allowed you to activate systems that had been dormant for millennia. That's why they captured you, why they had to suppress your memories." They emerged onto an observation deck, and Marcus stopped short. Through the transparent panels, he could see dozens of ships emerging from fold space, but they weren't Nexarian or human designs. They were something else entirely, their hulls covered in patterns that matched the structures he'd seen in his recovered memories. "The Preservers," Valthorian said, her voice filled with awe. The ones who have been protecting the architect's legacy, waiting for our species to be ready. She turned to him, her silver eyes intense. They're the ones who helped me understand the truth, who showed me what would happen if the corrupt leaders of both our species succeeded in their plans. Another explosion lit up space around them, and Marcus saw Nexarian warships beginning to engage the mysterious vessels. "We're out of time," Valthorian said urgently. "The preservers can get us to safety, but we have to reach the auxiliary docking bay." Marcus caught her arm before she could move. "Why did you really help me? The truth this time." Valthorian's armor rippled with colors he'd never seen before. "Because when I learned what we truly were, what we could be together, I couldn't bear to be part of keeping us apart. Our species weren't meant to be enemies, Marcus. We were meant to be something far greater." The station shuddered around them as more ships engaged in battle. Marcus looked at Valthorian, seeing not an alien warrior but a kindred spirit who had risked everything for the truth. In that moment, he made his decision. "Then let's show them what we can do together," he said, taking her hand. Her crystalline fingers intertwined with his, and for a brief moment, he felt the neural connection spark between them again, not sharing memories this time, but something deeper, a glimpse of the potential that had been hidden from both their species for so long. They ran together through the chaos of the battle-damaged station, towards a future neither of them could fully imagine, but both were now determined to fight for. The auxiliary docking bay was a war zone. Emergency force fields flickered erratically, struggling to maintain atmosphere as battle damage created breaches in the station's hull. Marcus and Valthorian crouched behind a fallen support beam, watching as Nexarian security forces exchanged fire with shadowy figures whose armor seemed to bend light around them. "Preserver infiltration team," Valthorian whispered, her crystalline armor adapting to match the surrounding shadows. "They're creating a diversion for us." Marcus studied the battlefield with trained eyes. "There's something else happening here. Those security teams, they're not moving like typical Nexarian forces. Their formations are all wrong." "Because they're not regular security," Valthorian's armor pulsed with concern. "Those are void hunters, elite assassins answering directly to the corrupt council members. They must have known this was coming." A massive explosion rocked the far side of the bay. Through the chaos, Marcus spotted their objective, a sleek vessel unlike anything he'd seen before, its hull covered in the same geometric patterns as the preserver ships outside. But reaching it meant crossing 30 meters of exposed deck under heavy fire. "The preservers can't hold that position much longer," Marcus observed. "We need a plan." Valthorian's armor suddenly shifted, becoming almost translucent. "Do you trust me, Marcus?" He looked at her, remembering everything they'd been through, everything she'd risked. "Yes." Without warning, she pulled him close, her armor expanding to envelop them both. Marcus felt a strange tingling as the crystalline structure adapted to his biology, creating a seamless interface between them. Suddenly he could feel what she felt, see through her enhanced senses. "Nexarian battle meld," she explained in his mind. "Usually only possible between our own kind, but you're different, special." Together they moved as one entity, their movements perfectly synchronized. Valthorian's crystalline technology enhanced Marcus's natural agility and strength, while his human intuition helped her predict and counter the Void Hunter's tactics. They crossed the deck in a blur of motion, Valthorian's armor deflecting energy blasts while Marcus guided their trajectory through the chaos. The preservers, recognizing their approach, intensified their covering fire. They were halfway to the ship when a new threat emerged. A massive figure stepped out of the shadows, its armor black as deep space, adorned with red crystalline formations that pulsed like dying stars. "Void Marshal," Valthorian's fear echoed through their connection. "The Council's most loyal enforcer." The Void Marshal's voice boomed across the bay, carrying harmonics that made Marcus's bones vibrate even through Valthorian's protective armor. The Council was right. "You've gone far beyond mere treachery, Valthorian. Joining minds with a human, you've become an abomination." "No," Valthorian projected her voice to match his. "I've become what we were always meant to be, what you've been fighting to prevent." The Void Marshal raised his weapon, a massive crystalline cannon that began drawing in energy from the surrounding chaos. Then prove it. Show me this supposed destiny you think you've discovered. What happened next would later become legend among both species. Valthorian and Marcus moved in perfect harmony, their merged form dancing through the Void Marshal's devastating attacks. Each blast that should have annihilated them instead passed through the space where they had been a fraction of a second before. Their counterattack was a symphony of human and Nexarian abilities. Marcus's combat experience guided their strategy, while Valthorian's crystalline powers provided the means to execute it. They struck from multiple angles, using the battle meld to coordinate complex maneuvers that no single being could have managed. But the Void Marshal was centuries old, a veteran of countless battles. He matched their speed, his ancient armor adapting to their tactics. The fight became a blur of crystalline energy and impossible movements, three beings pushing the boundaries of what their species were capable of. "The ship," Marcus communicated through their link. "We're running out of time." Valthorian understood instantly. As the Void Marshal gathered energy for another devastating attack, they sprinted for the vessel. The Preservers, sensing their intention, concentrated all their remaining firepower on the Void Marshal. They reached the ship just as the Void Marshal broke through the Preservers' barrage. As the entry hatch closed behind them, Marcus caught a final glimpse of their enemy. The Void Marshal stood amid the chaos, his red crystals pulsing with rage and something else: recognition, understanding. Inside the ship, Valthorian's armor retracted, releasing Marcus. Both of them stumbled, adjusting to being separate individuals again. The neural connection faded, but something of it lingered, a ghost of understanding between them that went beyond words. "What we just did," Marcus said, catching his breath, "that wasn't supposed to be possible, was it?" Valthorian's armor had settled into a deep blue with hints of gold, a color he'd never seen it take before. "No, the Council spent millennia convincing both our species that we were too different, that we could never truly understand each other. What we just proved." She paused, her silver eyes meeting his. "It changes everything." The ship's systems came to life around them, responding to some unseen signal. Through the viewports, they watched as space itself seemed to fold, creating a passage through dimensions neither of their species had known existed. As they accelerated toward their destiny, Marcus realized that their escape wasn't just about survival anymore. They had proven something extraordinary, something that could change the fate of both their species. The real question was, were their civilizations ready for the truth? The Preserver ship emerged from fold space into a region that defied conventional physics. Massive geometric structures floated in the void, their surfaces etched with the same patterns Marcus had seen in his recovered memories. But now, with his neural blocks fully dissolved, he understood what he was seeing. "The Nexus," Valthorian said softly, her armor reflecting the ethereal light of the ancient constructs. "The true heart of the Architect's network. This is what your team found 3 years ago." They stood on the ship's observation deck, surrounded by Preserver crew members whose forms seemed to shift between solid matter and pure energy. The beings had not spoken since the escape, communicating instead through subtle changes in the ship's crystalline architecture. "It's more than that," Marcus said, fragments of memory clicking into place. "It's a bridge, not just between spaces, but between species, my team. We didn't just find this place, we activated something." Valthorian's armor rippled with understanding. "The resonance patterns. That's why the Council was so desperate to suppress your memories. You discovered that human neural patterns could interface with Nexarian crystal technology at a fundamental level." A soft chime echoed through the ship, and a holographic display materialized before them. It showed thousands of vessels converging on their location, both human and Nexarian designs, but moving in perfect coordination. "The Resistance," Valthorian explained. "While I was guarding you, I wasn't just interfering with neural scans. I was transmitting proof to others who had begun to question the Council's lies. Every time we shared information, every moment of connection, it was recorded and shared across both our networks." Marcus watched the approaching fleets with a mixture of hope and apprehension. How many? Thousands on both sides. Scientists, warriors, leaders, all those who saw the truth and chose to act. Our escape was the signal they were waiting for. She turned to him, her silver eyes intense. But what we proved in the battle meld, that was the final piece they needed. Irrefutable proof that our species are stronger together than apart. The preserver ship's crystals hummed with increasing energy as they approached the heart of the Nexus. Massive structures began to align, creating patterns that seemed to pierce multiple dimensions. The architects didn't just create our species, Marcus said, understanding flowing through him as the ship systems interfaced with his enhanced awareness. They created all of this as a test. The war, the separation, it was never meant to be permanent. They were waiting to see if we could overcome it ourselves. Valthorian's armor shifted to match the complex patterns surrounding them. And now we have a choice to make. The Nexus can do more than bridge space. It can remake both our species, complete the transformation the architects began, but only if we choose it freely. The ship came to rest at the center of the vast geometric array. Through the viewports, they could see the combined fleet taking up defensive positions. Human and Nexarian ships working together with centuries of distrust forgotten in the face of a greater purpose. The Council won't let this happen without a fight, Marcus warned. Neither will the corrupt officials on Earth. They've invested too much in keeping us apart. Let them come, Valthorian said, her voice carrying harmonics of determination. We've shown what's possible, not just with the battle meld, but with this. She reached out, taking his hand. Where their skin met, crystalline patterns formed, creating a connection that needed no technology to sustain it. Marcus felt it not just their connection, but the potential it represented. The architects hadn't created two species destined for eternal conflict. They had created two halves of a greater whole, each evolving separately until they were ready to choose unity over division. The Nexus began to pulse with increasing power, responding to their combined presence. Around them, Preserver crew members shifted fully into energy form, their consciousness merging with the ancient systems. They're offering to show us the way, Valthorian said, interpreting the complex patterns. To guide both our species through the transformation, but the choice must be ours. Marcus looked at their joined hands, at the crystalline patterns that represented billions of years of planned evolution finally reaching its culmination. I made my choice the moment you spoke to me in that cell, he said softly. Everything since then has just been confirmation. Valthorian's armor blazed with colors that had no names in any human or Nexarian language. As did I, not just for us, but for all our people. Together, they stepped forward into the heart of the Nexus. Around them, the combined fleet stood ready to defend their choice, their unity a testament to the truth that had been hidden for so long. The transformation would not be easy, change never was. But they had proven that the impossible was possible, that barriers meant to divide could become bridges to unite. As the Nexus began its ancient protocols, Marcus and Valthorian stood as living proof of what their species could become. Not human, not Nexarian, but something new, something that had been written in their very DNA since the beginning of their races, waiting for the moment when they would choose to become what they were always meant to be. Together,